This is the Sports Bash Warm-Up with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN. Now, live inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, here's Josh Hennig.
Oh, this is a Doug Pederson pick. There's no question about it. Doug Pederson wants Jalen Hurts' skill set on this football team, Scott. Right after the pick, I texted Doug Pederson. I said, A, you got Carson Wentz. B, you have other needs. Why did you take this guy? And here's what he texted me back. He has a great skill set that we can use as a quarterback and as a runner. He's tough, competitive, and a proven winner. That, to me, Scott, sounds like a head coach who wants this guy to make an immediate impact on his football team.
That was Sal Paolantonio last night on Scott Van Pelt's Sports Center. About 20 minutes for midnight, that came across my TV, and I was like, okay, well, that answers the question. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here on the warm-up on 97.3 ESPN. Ryan, I had asked on Saturday, and we had talked about on Monday about, the possibility of Doug Pederson's input into this draft, and Sal Paolantonio just definitively gave us an inside look into how much the head coach is involved in the draft, and he called Jalen Hurts, the quote-unquote new backup quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, a Doug Pederson pick.
What does that mean, though, Josh? What does it mean?
What does it mean is that we're going to get into that coming up here. What are people's reactions? 609-403-0973 is the text board. Ryan, to me, I find it very interesting that Sal Pal was so definitive because, we've all heard Sal Paolantonio on the Sports Bash with Mike Gill over the last couple of years. He very rarely puts absolutes out there. For him to go out there and say that this is a Doug Pederson pick, it gets back to the question I asked, which is, I've always been curious how much influence other people who are not Howie Roseman have in the drafting and the offseason process of building this team. And Doug Pederson apparently really wanted Jalen Hurts to the point where he's willing to say he has skills that we want.
Yeah, and there's two different ways to look at this. The first thing is the avenue that you're going down, which is, maybe Doug Pederson does have more say in who the Eagles bring into the organization than we thought. That's not implying that we felt like he had no say.
Correct.
But at the end of the day, for me, Josh, it's still Howie Roseman's decision. You look at any leader, any boss in any industry, they have a responsibility. And Howie Roseman's responsibility is compiling assets and players and bringing in players, whether it's through free agency, trade, or the draft, and making decisions on how to build this football team. If he decides to let Doug Pederson sway him into a guy that he really likes because he values his opinion, that's still on Howie Roseman in my mind. Right? I don't play the blame game of, well, this is Doug's pick, it's Doug's fault. No, it's still at the end of the day, Howie's fault. And I still want to get into, well, do we have fault? Do we have blame? Who do we praise? Who do we fault? All of that stuff is interesting to me. But I want your take on, what does that mean for you? So is Doug Pederson controlling this offense and controlling the picks involved in it? And how are they building this team? And what changes your opinion with that soundbite?
Well, first of all, my biggest question, just what you specifically said, Ryan, is, yes, it is Howie Roseman's decision. At the end of the day, he is the end-all, be-all. But I find it interesting that, for how many years have we heard and had to suffer, for lack of a better term, through the argument, is this a Howie pick? Is this a Joe Douglas pick? Is this a Chip Kelly pick? Well, now we got a Doug Pederson pick. And I'm very curious how fans feel about that because of the fact that how many times have people, whether they're Eagle fans or non-Eagle fans, wanted to blame things on Howie Roseman, and then we find out later that it might not have been, quote-unquote, Howie Roseman's idea. It might have been Howie Roseman's decision, but how much of it was Howie Roseman's idea? And I ask you, Ryan, is it a positive or a negative that Howie is willing to be influenced by other people like this?
Oh, I think it's a positive. I think you look at, once again, any good organization, company, any entity with a hierarchy, everyone should have some type of voice. I know it's a different amount of responsibility that everyone has, but everyone should feel like they have a voice, and especially the head coach of the football team. Like, I don't want a dictatorship. Do you?
No, I don't want a dictatorship at all. But I think that it's been inferred at times that it is a bit of a dictatorship when it comes to Howie Roseman, because there's always been this assumption that, well, Howie's the guy making these decisions. Well, this was a Howie pick. Well, this was a Howie move. Well, we have now proof that there is some other people involved in the decision, as we all suspected all along. At what point are we actually going to turn around and say, okay, well, if this is a Doug Pederson pick, maybe there is more value to this pick beyond what we initially thought?
And I'm glad you went down that road there, because you looked at that clip one way and I look at it another way. I look at it this way. Doug Peterson's answer, okay, forget the responsibility factor for a second in Doug's freedom to bring in players through the draft. I look at it, and disclaimer, I was a big fan of the Jalen Hurts decision to bring him in the second round, but I don't know if I buy Doug's answer as to why they did it. Because it feels like to me, if Carson Wentz wasn't consistently getting hurt, fair or foul, if Carson Wentz was someone that's maybe a little bit aged and in his prime, like an Aaron Rodgers, and he's a little bit older, but someone that's a guaranteed Pro Bowler, someone that's led them deep into the playoffs, do they make that same pick? It seems like this is an insurance policy, which is smart. And it seems like they need a guy at that number 2 position on the depth chart. But it just doesn't feel to me that Doug's answer and explanation wasn't the main underlying factor in all of this.
Now, what do you feel like is the main underlying factor then? What do you think that Doug's answer was a bit of coach speak then, maybe?
I do. I do feel like it was coach speak, and that's fine. That's what the coach is going to give us, but it's our job to analyze that. And I analyze that answer as Carson hasn't been reliable. And he's an MVP talent at his best when healthy, but he's not always healthy. I know you look at the games, he's played in a lot of games. I think it's misleading, the injury conversation surrounding Carson, but this organization has dealt with a lot at the quarterback position. You look at from day one since Carson Wentz joined the Philadelphia Eagles, it's been a lot. Doug Pederson has bared a lot of weight on his shoulders, dealing with Nick Foles, dealing with Carson Wentz, dealing with the questions surrounding the quarterback, always having something going on with his offense that is another hurdle for him to jump over. So I think he sees all of that and what he's dealt with over the past 3 to 4 years and says, you know what? Nate isn't cutting it. We have an opportunity to get a guy that's highly skilled, and we're going to go get him because maybe we don't extend Carson in 2024. Maybe Carson gets hurt once again this year, and we're going to have to seriously evaluate that position. That's how I kind of look at everything from a macro level.
609-403-0973 is the text board to get on the conversation. Is now Jalen Hurts is a Doug Pederson pick. What is your reaction to that? You know, you bring up the availability of Wentz and having a backup plan. You know, the Eagles before this year have drafted 7 quarterbacks outside the first round since the year 2000. And I would say at least half of those guys have reached the field, whether it's A.J. Feely, Kevin Cobb, whether it's Matt Barkley. We try to forget about him, obviously. But Nick Foles won a Super Bowl championship. So the franchise as a whole does have a history of drafting quarterbacks and those guys getting some sort of playing time because of injury. I mean, how many times was McNabb injured? This whole situation with a quarterback who's a starter in Philadelphia getting injured is nothing new for Philadelphia fans. And I have to wonder, Ryan, you know, beyond this being a Doug Pederson pick, like you just said, if they are saying, look, we got to have a contingency plan, we got to have a certain kind of backup, and if they looked at Jalen Hurts and they said this guy has intangibles that we can't get past, Howie Roseman has inferred that the Eagles wanted to take Russell Wilson years ago and they passed on him, and that was part of the reason why they drafted Hurts here. My goodness, if that's your way of thinking, and if you're going through the process of saying, look, we have to prepare for the inevitable, which is if our starting quarterback is not out there, we need to have a certain person behind him. Like you just said, Ryan, maybe the Eagles are looking at Nate Sudfeld and be like, this guy ain't going to cut it.
Is that a concern for you?
It definitely is, because they went out of their way to bring in Nate Sudfeld. Remember, they signed Nate Sudfeld a couple of years ago because another team wanted to pick him up off their practice squad. They have held on to this guy for 2 years now, and it's been intimated, if you believe certain reports out there, that Nate Sudfeld wants to go to another team and be a starter one day and lead his own team. But then the Eagles don't trust him to be the long-term insurance policy behind Wentz. I think that's a little concerning.
But what's concerning to me, Josh, is that they bring up the Russell Wilson dynamic. Like, as I've pointed out many times, how I view the NFL draft, it's a game of blackjack. It's a game of craps. You're gambling, all right? And you can do all the research. You can have the best scouting department in the world. You can be a great talent evaluator. All right, you can be the best in the business, and you could miss on a guy. And there's going to be a guy that you could have drafted, and you didn't. I mean, if you're going to look back at every single draft at a guy that was on the board that you went a different direction with, I think you're going to drive yourself mad. I don't know if that's a recipe for success.
It may not be. And if it's not a recipe for success, Ryan, then my next question would be, because of what you just asked, if this team is focusing in a certain direction, does it concern you that that hyper focus may then neglect them from other things?
I mean, as far as what? Like, what is that implying? What are you implying, that they're too focused on what? The quarterback position?
Right. Are we looking at the quarterback position too much instead of the people around him at the end? Because when you look at for example, look at the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers have not drafted a skilled position outside of quarterback in the last 15 years.
In the first round.
You have organizations like the Panthers and the Patriots who very frequently do not go get top-tier talent in the top rounds. And they leave their quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Cam Newton in that situation, without top-tier talent. Aaron Rodgers, top-tier talent. You have to wonder, at what point are the Eagles potentially playing with fire? Because now we see what happened to other organizations when they don't get the top-tier talent. Those organizations, unless they have a surefire Hall of Famer or they have an elite defense, they're not as successful.
You know, it's like Bill Belichick let his dog run the drafts. I mean,
the dog's name is Nike.
Okay, Nike?
Yeah.
Strong name. I like it. Just do it. But Bill Belichick has never really cared about the draft, especially in the first round. He traded out of it once again this year. The Patriots drafted 11 quarterbacks in the Tom Brady era. You mentioned the Eagles have drafted 7 since 2000.
Yes.
So the quarterback position is the most important position in football, in the NFL. And if your depth chart is pretty weak after one, I think it should be a pretty high priority to address it. And listen, especially where we do this, we cover the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that won the Super Bowl with a backup. And I'm not saying that's something you need to plan for and expect to happen again, but that just shows the value of having depth at the quarterback position. So if you're not happy with your current backup situation, you better address it. And it's not like the Eagles didn't address their other needs so far. You know, we talked about running back yesterday, Josh, and that's fair. But Miles Sanders looks like he could be a legit star in this league. It seems like Doug Pederson and the coaching staff is very high and sold on Boston Scott. If he can be even a slither of the Darren Sproles type of player, I think they're okay at running back. You bring in one more guy, whether that's a Shady McCoy or a younger guy, I think you have a pretty decent three-headed monster there. You went and made a trade with the 49ers. You go and add another player in Hightower later in the draft. You go and take your first-round draft pick and add a guy in Rager. I mean, they have Ertz and Goddard. They have Deshaun Jackson. It's not like they're ignoring the weapons around the quarterback. Wouldn't you agree?
See, I don't think so, and that's where I agree with you, but I think the perception, and again, perception sometimes is reality, is that when you take a quarterback in the second round, like Hurts, or years ago, like Kevin Cobb, for example, when Donovan McNabb was here, there is a again, it's not that it's true, but a perception that you are overlooking other things the team might need at that slot in the draft. And yes, you're right. The Eagles walked out of the draft with 4 different wide receivers, 3 drafted, 1 acquired via trade. They walked out of the draft with 2 backup offensive linemen. They walked out of the draft with other things that they needed, 2 linebackers, one of them more of a raw talent, and one of them probably more likely to be a special teams guy. But either way, they got a safety who can play linebacker as well. They did get other positions in the draft and in free agency. So is it, the perception may be that, well, getting this quarterback in second round is neglecting need. But I think the Eagles could counter and say, we spent the whole offseason addressing needs.
Well, I would counter and say we are addressing a need. we need depth at the quarterback position. We need weapons on our offense. And as Doug just mentioned, Sal mentioned what Doug mentioned, that Jalen Hurts is going to be used as a weapon. Even if Carson Wentz is healthy, they're going to get him on the field. They're going to, tailor certain packages to Jalen Hurts. Even if Carson is a Pro Bowler, it doesn't matter. Jalen Hurts is going to see the field. I think that's how I'm looking at this situation right now. So for someone to say they're not addressing their needs, their perception is completely wrong. It's like, how crazy is this thinking? Like, just because the Eagles have Carson Wentz, they're not allowed to address the quarterback position? Like in the NBA, if the Sixers go draft a great guard in the next NBA draft or a great point guard, are we going to sit here and freak out at them and say, well, you have Ben Simmons. You can't. No one else can come in here now because you already have a star. I mean, it's preposterous. It doesn't make any sense to me. I know it's different, but that's the best analogy and comparison I can make just to try and put it into perspective for people that are freaking out about this.
609-403-0973. One of those people, I wouldn't say they're freaking out, but Mike from the Village chimes in, says, I don't understand why they didn't take Jake in the 4th round. I believe he's talking about Jake Fromm, and then take a second-round pick with another wide receiver, linebacker, or safety. Doesn't make sense. Well, to me, my response to Mike Ryan is, number one, Jake Fromm can't do what Jalen Hurts can do. He's not as physically strong. He's not as physically athletic. People don't know is that Jalen Hurts is a dude who goes out and squats 600 pounds with ease. He's a physical freak of nature. So he's not some regular quarterback. He's a phenomenal athlete. He was a runner-up in the Heisman for a reason. And Jake Fromm doesn't have the intangibles that Jake Hurts does. Let's remember, Jake Fromm, when things broke down at Georgia, things didn't play out very well for him. That South Carolina loss this year, they lost at home, by the way, to a mediocre South Carolina team. As soon as Georgia's offensive linemen stopped being able to block correctly, Fromm looked like a dead duck who couldn't do anything. Jalen Hurts is a way different player. I think people are looking at the quarterback position way differently than the Eagles are, Ryan, in that the Eagles are saying, look, this guy can do more than just throw a football. He has the character, the intangibles, the physical traits to be a great locker room guy, a great quarterback room guy, a great weapon for this team. And people are still looking at Hurts as just a quarterback.
And I think there's something that people don't realize. Like, there's a possibility that the Eagles are way ahead of their time here. And I'm going to explain that.
Mm-hmm.
The NFL is hoping to switch to 17 games. The NFL is planning on limiting practice even more. So what does that mean? It means that injuries could go up. It means there could be more rust. It means there could be a different type of offensive game plan for teams around the league in the next 5 to 10 years. And I wouldn't be surprised if the league switches to a 2-quarterback type of mentality. And you have a guy on most teams, on almost every team, that's like Jalen Hurts, that can come in for 10 to 20 plays a game, that you package RPOs for, that you run the ball with him and Miles Sanders, whatever it may be. But I think the bottom line is, I'm going to use the NBA once again. The NBA, you have guys now that are 7 foot, can play 1 through 5. I kind of look at Jalen Hurts like that. Like, you want guys that can throw the ball, that can run the ball, that can line up in the backfield, that can line up in the slot, that can line up on the outside. I love Taysom Hill. I joke about it often. I think guys like that are going to have more and more of a role as the years go on in the NFL.
609-403-0973. Dan from EHT kind of implies what you're talking about, Ryan. Dan from EHT says, everyone says, why would the Eagles do this after signing Wentz to a max contract? I think the Eagles evaluated last season and realized what the situation is. They need to implement. They need more implemented on offense. Progression is not regression. Hurts has the potential to be the new age of quarterback. It's Dan and EHT.
Boom. Yeah, it's exactly what I said. Now, I do want to ask this, though. Is that a good plan? Because that brings everything back to what Sal Pal said Doug Pederson told him, that Jalen Hurts has a skill set that they're going to use for him to get on the field, even if Carson Wentz is healthy. Is that a recipe for success in this city with this organization this upcoming football season?
Well, I think that when you look at this upcoming football season, because there are so many unknowns, wouldn't you be able to argue that you had to prepare for multiple situations and possibilities that maybe you weren't fully factoring in previously?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that always has to be the case in your mindset, but especially this year, you're right. But as I mentioned earlier as well, like, what's the Eagles' real game plan here? What if Hurts is doing really well in a limited role? Like, then what? Maybe that's it? But I think there's going to be fans that start to say, wait a second, this Hurts guy can play. I mean, Carson has one bad game, and what's going to happen? I'm not saying those are reasons to not draft Jalen Hurts. I wanted them to do that. I like the pick, but I just think they're all fair questions to bring up. Do they have all of the potential scenarios outlined in their head before they made this decision?
609-403-0973. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein here on the warm-up. Keep a text coming. With the more coming up next, as well as Ryan asks a very interesting question on Twitter. We'll get to that question about Jalen Hurts coming up next. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Ryan, before we get to the text, I want to play this cut. So Howie Roseman was on Pro Football Talk with Mike Florio, and he talked about the Eagles' history of needing backup quarterbacks. Take a listen.
And I talked about 2002 and doing that. 2003, we played in the championship game. Donovan McNabb got knocked out. We played with a backup quarterback. We come back in 2005. We had a backup quarterback. We went 5-11. The next year, Jeff Garcia as a backup quarterback, we won the division with. 2010, Mike Vick started as a backup quarterback, won the division. 2013, Nick Foles came in as the backup quarterback, won the division. And then, our last 3 years. So when we look at what makes a difference in the terms of winning and losing and how valuable this position is, it seemed to us when we went back and forth about the logic of this and obviously the evaluation of the player and what he could add to our team, that it made sense.
And sorry, Ryan, but if the texter earlier was saying that Jake Fromm is a better person to come in that situation than Jalen Hurts, then please let me take a long walk on a short pier and drown myself.
Wow, that is extremely aggressive from Josh Hennig. But here's the thing, I agree with you, but I think that texter is potentially implying, like, look at everything as a whole. If you really want a backup quarterback, go get a guy that's a little less talented in Jake Fromm and add more of a weapon in the second round with that 53rd pick and getting another receiver like a Denzel Mims or whatever it may be, trading up. Doesn't matter. Go get another receiver and then get Fromm later on. I don't agree with that line of thinking, but I assume that's what the texter implies. But Howie, I want to give him a round of applause because he points out all of the years that the Eagles were able to sustain success due to the backup quarterback position. I mean, I don't know what else you need to know.
Well, I think what people will need to know is, that the Eagles are not looking at the team the same way some of the fans are. And listen, there's an old saying, right? If you listen to the fans, you end up sitting with them, right? There's a reason why the Eagles won a championship, because they did it their way. Doug and Howie did it their way. Schwartz has been doing it his way. For better or for worse, their way has gotten this team to 3 straight playoff appearances, something that Chip Kelly couldn't do. And listen, if they legitimately think that Jalen Hurts is potentially going to be the guy who has to come in, like A.J. Feely, like Jeff Garcia, like Kevin Cobb, like Nick Foles, and like Michael Vick, as how he documented, and that Hurts can be that guy, I kind of trust their evaluation, Ryan, a little bit more than random guy online saying that they should have drafted Denzel Mims.
What if the Eagles went 6-0 to start the season this upcoming year, and Carson goes down, out for the season, and in comes Nate Sudfeld, and he's only able to win a game?
Then we're all going to be screaming, why is Nate Sudfeld the backup, and why didn't you draft a quarterback?
Exactly. It would either be that. It would either be that, or you should have never got rid of Nick Foles. Oh, stop it.
By the way, so speaking of backup quarterbacks, you put out a poll on your Twitter account at Ryan973ESPN, and this is the question. If the Eagles did not draft Jalen Hurts, they could have been in the market for a backup quarterback. That's a very reasonable point to put out there. Well, Jameis Winston has signed a 1-year deal with the Saints for $1.1 million. And you asked, who would you rather have at the backup quarterback position? Now, as of right now, 60% of the voting is going Jalen Hurts, 40% Jameis Winston. And Ryan, my biggest question to people who would rather have Winston over Hurts, my biggest question is, you do realize that Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions last year.
Right. He was 30 for 30, and it wasn't a documentary.
Right. Although his career might be documentary if he keeps going the way it is.
Yeah, if he keeps licking his fingers in a really creepy way, he's on his way to a documentary. I mean, you pointed out something really funny, like, or no, you didn't. I'm sorry. On Twitter, someone put, well, I hope Deshaun Jackson maybe let everyone know about the W finger licking pregame to not get him in here.
Right.
but I thought that signing was perfect because that's the perfect other option. Like, okay, you're freaking out about bringing in a rookie who you drafted in the 2nd round. But if the Eagles really need a quarterback at the backup position, which I think it's clear we can all agree they did, you can rank the need however you want. What was their other option if they don't draft a guy? They're going to go get Jameis Winston for 1 year, a veteran. That changes the whole dynamic of the quarterback room. It changes everything. Now Carson has a guy under his wings who's going to be looking up to him. Winston is going to be looking to take his job. That whole dynamic in the locker room would be a nightmare.
Also, Jameis Winston, and listen, this is a personal thing that I have. This is an assessment that I have that, is where I stand on Winston. I've never felt that Winston is a guy who is a great quality character guy for a locker room or a quarterback room. He's a guy who's had off the field issues. He always has these strange reasons why he doesn't have success at times. His ability to explain the game in post-game interviews, frankly, is uncomfortable at times. He doesn't have the football IQ that a lot of quarterbacks around the league do. And he's a guy who's more of a project than he is a guy who's really able to contribute. He's not the athlete that Jalen Hurts is. He doesn't have the dynamic playmaking ability that Hurts does. And I think that Winston is better off in New Orleans because he's finally going to be able to be in a quarterback room with a guy who actually can teach him some things about life in football. Whereas if he came to Philadelphia, him and Wentz are basically age-wise peers. Do we really want that kind of, lack of a better term, problem in our quarterback room with Carson Wentz?
No, he's a headache waiting to happen. That's the bottom line. Jameis Winston would be a headache waiting to happen. And there's a reason, all the points you just rattled off, there's a reason why Winston just signed a 1-year, $1 million deal as a backup. Because he has not been able to be successful. I've said it for the last 2 years watching Winston in Tampa Bay. The guy's a joke. All right. And maybe he can revitalize his career by going in that situation, going in New Orleans, learning from Breeze. We'll see. If he does, great. Happy for him. But that's not something the Eagles want to bring on. And even if it's not Winston, Winston's just the perfect example.
Yeah.
Bring in any veteran as a backup. It's pretty much the same type of situation. And the dynamic in the locker room and in the quarterback room would be much different. And that would impact the team as a whole. So if you're not going to get a guy in free agency like that, and you're not going to get a guy in the draft, then you're going to have good old Nate. And you're not going to have much depth at the most important position in the entire NFL.
609-403-0973 is the text board to get on the conversation. Also, how about this, Ryan? We talked about this on the Sports Bash the other day with Mike Gill. Since 2016, the Philadelphia Eagles have spent $33 million on the backup quarterback position between Nick Foles, Chase Daniel, Josh McCown, and Nate Sudfeld. I'm pretty sure that Jalen Hurts, as a second-round pick is a little bit more cost-effective.
And that has to be a big factor in all of this. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I think it's one major part because if you believe the people who cover the team, like the John McMullins and the other guys like Jeff Mosher and the others who cover the team, they have talked about the fact that the Eagles are trying to roll over cap space from this year to next year to withstand the growing salaries that are coming in for the contract extensions for Wentz, Ertz, Lane Johnson, and Fletcher Cox. So if you're trying to budget your money, going out there and throwing money at another backup quarterback probably isn't the best solution to be fiscally conservative, for lack of a better term.
Dude, can't you make an argument that by drafting a quarterback this year in the second round like Hurts, that allows them to build around Carson Wentz?
Long term, yes.
Like you said, he's cost effective. Like if you don't go that direction, then you're going to tie up your money, as you just mentioned, like they have in the past, on a backup guy, and that's going to limit your ability to build your team in other positions. So the fans out there that are screaming the Eagles are ignoring a need, you could make the complete opposite argument that because they did this, they're able to focus on those exact needs and address those needs because they got a rookie in that spot.
Now, the web text here is 609-403-0973. And listen, this person makes an interesting point, and I'm not going to ignore it, but I want to address it. He says, number one, how about Joe Flacco? And number two, for you to say that Jameis Winston isn't electric, do you follow football, with 3 question marks? Well, first of all, Jameis Winston may have an electric arm, but he's not an electric athlete. How many times have you ever seen Jameis Winston break off multiple runs in a game for first downs or touchdowns? He's not an elite mobile quarterback. In fact, in his own draft, he was less mobile and less athletic than the guy picked after him, Marcus Mariota, who, by the way, is, I believe, going to be the backup quarterback at Las Vegas for the Raiders. So good luck with that. So no, Jameis Winston is not an electric athlete. I'm talking about a guy who can be mobile. And by the way, Joe Flacco isn't mobile either. And Joe Flacco, according to reports, I was surprised when I heard this over the weekend, he actually hasn't been medically cleared to play yet.
Dude, I don't want Joe Flacco. I'm sorry, South Jersey, bro. Much respect. Double pound on the chest there. Much love, South Jersey. I don't want Joe Flacco. Don't want him. All right. And then Jameis Winston is electric. Do I follow football? Dude, do you follow football? Bruce Arians literally said, well, we won. How many games did Tampa win last year? 7?
I think
we won 7 games with this guy. So next year we should be an improvement with literally anyone. That was before they got Tom Brady. Jameis Winston is not a guy that you are going to look at on film and say, whoo, man, that dude's electric. No, that dude is electric in all the worst ways. He's going to shock you like a lightning bolt and put you in the hospital.
Yeah, in the last 4 years with Jameis Winston at quarterback, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have won a total of, looks like 26 games. That's really
there you
great.
Go.
That's great.
And how many interceptions? 80 million? It's a joke.
Well,
dude.
he just had 30 last year. He has 30 interceptions, 14 interceptions the last 2 years. So he's got 44 just the last 2 seasons. And then his first 2 years in the league, he combined for, looks like, 33, 15, and 18.
Dude, he leads the NFL in pick sixes, too. He doesn't just throw interceptions. He gives the other team 6 points.
Jameis Winston has a career record of 28-42 as a starting NFL quarterback.
There you go. So I don't know anything that's electric. Maybe as a backup or a third stringer, but not for this situation in Philadelphia. I'm sorry. Winston had the potential to maybe be electric coming out of college, and I think he's proven time and time again that he's not capable of being electric at the pro level.
And listen, he has a great throwing arm, but you know who else had a great throwing arm?
Everyone does.
Well, for all the older football fans, Jeff George has one of the greatest arms ever to play football. When he came out of college, people thought this guy was going to be the next John Elway. The guy was such a mental basket case and couldn't get along with people that he literally burned bridges everywhere he went, from the Colts to the Falcons. He later ended up in Minnesota for a hot second and Washington. So just because you have great arm talent, I don't care. Listen, talent doesn't matter as much in sports anymore because of the fact that if you can't get along with people and your head isn't in the right place, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. And I look at Jameis Winston, and all I see is Jeff George, honestly.
Dude, you know who else had great arm talent? Jamarcus Russell. I mean, what the hell are you saying if someone has arm talent? Every quarterback that's even in consideration to be at the NFL level has arm strength. Some have more than others, but they're all great athletes. They all have a strong arm, some stronger than others, but none of them are really weak unless you're like Chad Pennington. And that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean that they're worthy of being a star in this league or even a starting quarterback, i.e. Winston, who's going to be backing up Breeze for $1 million on a 1-year deal.
And by the way, Joe Flacco, he's 35 years old. He is a guy coming off of an injury that basically forced him out of Denver. He's not even going to be in Denver anymore. And he, like Cam Newton, because of their health situation, they're not going to get signed anytime soon because teams are not going to take the risk on guys if they can't medically track them right now. And I'm pretty sure that Cam Newton is a much better commodity for a quarterback than Joe Flacco is. And the fact that Flacco also can't get a job right now tells me that his health situation is prohibitive for him to even be a backup in Philadelphia, and his experience doesn't matter if he's not healthy.
I think I'd rather have McCown right now as backup than Joe Flacco.
I mean, Josh McCown with the torn hamstring?
That's right. He gave us more in that game with one hamstring than Joe Flacco would have.
609-403-0973 is the text board to get on the conversation. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein, talking with you. Eagles, Jalen Hurts, Eagles quarterback position right here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get to more of your texts coming up next. Again, 609-403-0973. Plus, coming up on the Sports Bash, speaking of backup quarterbacks, you know who's seen all the Eagles backup quarterbacks you mentioned earlier? That's Dave Weinberg. He joins Mike Gill coming up at 2:30 today on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Josh Hennig, Ryan Rothstein wrapping up the warm-up here on 97.3 ESPN. You know, Ryan, I don't think people realize the pandemic we have in the NFL when it comes to backup quarterbacks, because I think people assume that the Philadelphia Eagles backup quarterback situation is maybe a little bit more okay than it really is. Because when you look around the NFL, the Packers just drafted a project, so he's now the backup. The Patriots have Brian Hoyer, Jarrett Stidham, and they signed an undrafted free agent in Brian Lewerke. Your backups in Buffalo behind Josh Allen are Matt Barkley. Get excited, Philadelphia fans. He was your draft pick years ago. And Jake Fromm, who apparently can't play very well at Georgia unless everything around him is picture perfect. And by the way, I am very curious to know how many times are we going to forget that there is another quarterback in the NFL who has been injured close to as many times as Wentz has, and that's Aaron Rodgers. And look how that's worked out for Green Bay.
Well, yeah, that's worked out pretty darn good. I just think the problem here is, newsflash, Carson hasn't led this team to a deep playoff run. So that's where the skepticism and unknown factor of what Carson can really do when it comes down to it comes into play. But there's still a ton of teams, as you mentioned, Josh, that don't even have a great number one on their depth chart for quarterback, and they have no options past that. And as we mentioned, once again, the Eagles know better than anyone. Howie pointed out all the years where the backup quarterback was essential, the Super Bowl run being at the top of that list. You need depth at every position. Howie's job and Doug Pederson's job is to make this team better, one through 3, 1 through 5, however long the depth chart is at each position, regardless. Just because you have one guy that you're confident in doesn't mean you stop doing your job.
By the way, I got some interesting fantasy football news for you, Ryan.
Oh, okay. What do you got?
Taysom Hill will now be granted the tight end flex eligibility in ESPN fantasy leagues this year. He will no longer be eligible as a quarterback, though we reserve the right to add that to him on the fantasy setup. This is according to Mike Clay of ESPN. So ESPN Fantasy, if you want to pick up Taysom Hill in your fantasy league and use him as a flex option, you can do that starting this year.
I love it. That's how it should be. You should be able to plug in a guy anywhere you want. You know, listen,
anywhere you want.
If you want to put Deshaun Jackson at quarterback, that's your right. All right. This is America. All right. And America runs on fantasy football.
Well, speaking of Deshaun Jackson, I believe he had some choice words to say about his availability next year.
Yeah, he certainly did. So I saw this earlier, and I wanted to bring it up at some point today in the show. So Deshaun Jackson posted this on Instagram, and there's a few curse words that I'm obviously not able to read, but you'll pick up what I'm putting down.
Right.
He said, MFs got me bleeped up if they think I'm the third wide receiver. Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. I'm still a number one in all cap letters. Wide receiver, trust that, exclamation point, exclamation point. I promise y'all to keep that same energy, ... Now, I want to ask you this and ask the listeners this. Is that a positive? Is that just going to light a fire under him to prove something? Or is this going to be a locker room issue?
Oh, I think this definitely is lighting some sort of fire. Although I don't know who these people are who are saying that Deshaun Jackson is a number 3 receiver. I haven't heard or seen anybody say that. But hey, listen, whatever motivational tool you want to use to get yourself extra ready for the season, I'm all for it.
And I'm with you. I don't think anyone in particular literally said that. But I look at it that, D-Jax is watching the draft. He's seeing all the moves the Eagles are making at wide receiver. And he's saying, yo, raising his hand. You still got me, bro. Like, you're going out and drafting a wide receiver in the first round, making the trade, adding another receiver in the 4th round or 5th round in Hightower. What are you trying to say by making those moves? I think that's how he's looking at it. I could be wrong.
Well, listen, and like I said, whatever he has to do to help motivate himself, I'm all for it. But I think that the Eagles' moves were less about specifically Deshaun Jackson than it was about the fact that you have a wide receiver opposite of Jackson who probably won't play for at least the first 8 to 10 weeks of the season, Alshon Jeffrey, if he ever plays in an Eagles uniform ever again. It has to do with the fact that the rest of the wide receiver roster was pretty short on speed outside of Deshaun Jackson. Even Greg Cosell of NFL Film said the Eagles were one of the slowest teams he saw on film on offense all of last year. So to me, the Eagles picks were less about Deshaun than it was about the fact that the Eagles were just slow at the receiver position in general.
Oh, you're 100% right. But, D-Jax is going to look at it a little bit differently, and maybe he just needs to use that, as you said, as a, motivational tool to light a fire under him. Not that he needs a fire lit under him, but it always helps to have a bigger fire lit under you, just to have the competitive edge and the competitive nature to prove that you're the best and you can still do what you do at an elite level. And you're right. I think the biggest takeaway now as we sit here on April 29th is this Eagles team is fast, barring any injury. They're fast. And I just want to see Carson get that confidence and swagger back and not be afraid to use his legs, because we pointed that out often last season.
I'm reading the book as kind of like a companion to the Jordan documentary. It's called Playing for Keeps. It's about Jordan's life and the people around him in his life by David Haberstrom. And it's kind of become like a companion guide for me for The Last Dance. And one of the things they bring up in the book is about how Jordan's perceived slights that motivated him went all the way back to high school. And the fact that this is a guy who literally would find any reason to be motivated to say, I'm going to come out and prove you wrong. And you know what? If D-Jax wants to pick up that Jordan mentality, then the Eagles might actually be a better team than we thought next year.
You're right. I 100% love it, but I just think some people and listeners out there could read that quote and say, uh-oh, trouble in paradise. I don't look at it that way, but you just want to feed the beast. Once D-Jax is on the field and healthy, get him the rock.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the people who might misconstrue that as a negative are probably either anti-D-Jax people, or there's somebody looking for something in a world where there's really nothing to be found there. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, I want some motivated guys. I want some passionate guys. I want some guys dropping bombs on their social media saying, look at me out here working hard. I'm ready to go. Because listen, whenever the season starts, there's not going to be any mini camps or OTAs this offseason. So if everyone's out there working their butt off to be ready for the season to start, maybe the Eagles are in better condition than half the league when the league year starts, and that's going to get them out to a hot start and put them in a position to have a good seed for the playoffs.
Absolutely. Listen, you brought up yesterday that coaching staffs that have been in their organization for a good amount of time and are elite, the cream is going to rise to the top this season. I think that's my point.
Absolutely, and hopefully D-Jax is one of those guys who rises to the top. And listen, whoever the quarterback is chucking the ball around the field, you have the chance to go out there on the field on Sundays or whatever day the Eagles play, because I know they both play Mondays and Thursdays. But the point is game day, you have a healthy Deshaun Jackson. You could have Marquise Goodwin across from him. You could have Zach Ertz at one tight end, Dallas Goedert at the other, and Miles Sanders in the backfield. Tell me exactly how few points you're going to score in that system.
Yeah, good luck if you're an opposing defensive coordinator trying to game plan for that. Even with no film out there to watch all of that, to watch that unit as a whole right now, just rattling off those names and knowing if healthy, who's going to be lined up on the offensive side of the ball, that gives the Eagles already a competitive advantage. And now if the coaching staff and Doug Pederson are able to really utilize what they have, it's going to be a fun year.
And listen, don't overlook the Marquise Goodwin acquisition, because that's the guy who is probably a top 5 deep threat still in this league. And half the reason why he didn't play last year was because they just decided to verify put a variance on the 49ers offense last year that just didn't factor him in. So it's not like he's a washed up guy either. So whether it's Rager, Goodwin, or whoever across from D-Jack, it's still a huge threat. Ryan, your Twitter account is
Ryan973 ESPN. Follow me.
I am at Josh Hennig, HENNIG on Twitter.